The immigrant cab driver returns $100,000 left in taxi, stunned when passenger gives him a new life. These words had replayed in Amir Najem's mind countless times since that rainy Tuesday evening, like a prayer or perhaps a reminder that even in the cruelest city, miracles could still unfold from the smallest acts of honesty. The windshield wipers of Amir's aging yellow cab slashed furiously against the October downpour, each swipe barely clearing his view before the next sheet of water obscured Manhattan's glittering skyline. His 12-hour shift had stretched to 14, and the persistent ache in his lower back had graduated to sharp stabs of pain that radiated down his left leg. Still, he couldn't afford to head home yet. The rent was due in 3 days, and he was still short by $400. Steam rose from sewer grates as Amir navigated the crowded streets, his headlights catching the silver threads of rain. 5 years in America, and some days it still felt like he had arrived yesterday. Disoriented, hopeful, terrified. Back home in Syria, he had been Professor Najem, respected economist with 2 published books and a comfortable apartment overlooking Damascus. Here he was just another immigrant driver, invisible except when needed, forgotten the moment the fare was paid. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter Layla. "Don't forget your medicine, Baba." "Love you." A small smile softened the tired lines around his eyes. For her, all of this was worth it. Safe in her freshman dorm at City College, studying on scholarship, far from the bombs that had taken her mother and their home. If driving 18 hours some days meant Layla could sleep without nightmares, he would drive until his hands froze to the wheel. The dispatch radio crackled. "Anyone near Park and 63rd? Executive pickup, Harrington Building." Amir tapped his acceptance. Executive pickup sometimes meant decent tips, and he needed every dollar tonight. Outside the gleaming Harrington Building, a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stood partially sheltered by the minimal overhang, one hand raised imperiously while the other clutched his phone. Despite the rain, he wore no coat. As Amir pulled to the curb, the man yanked open the door before the cab had fully stopped. "Sony, Financial District, 388 Greenwich," the man said without looking up from his phone. His voice clipped with the particular sharpness that came from a lifetime of being obeyed without question. "Yes, sir," Amir replied, pulling carefully back into traffic. In the rearview mirror, Amir studied his passenger. Mid-50s, silver threading through dark hair that had been expertly cut to disguise its thinning. The man's face was all sharp angles, hawkish nose, prominent cheekbones, a jaw perpetually clenched as if biting back harsher words. His hands moved rapidly over his phone screen, thumbs dancing as he fired off what must have been dozens of messages. "God damn it," the man muttered, pressing his phone to his ear. "Marcus, I don't care what the Tokyo office says. If they back out now, we'll ruin them in Q2. No, I need those signatures tonight." Amir focused on the road, trying to tune out the one-sided conversation that continued in increasingly agitated tones. The traffic crawled through Midtown, brake lights bleeding red reflections onto the wet asphalt. He'd learned to make himself invisible during these rides, a ghost ferrying the living through the city's arteries. 20 minutes into what should have been a 10-minute trip, the passenger's phone rang again. This time his voice changed entirely. "Hey, sweetie." The sharp edges softened. "No, I'm still at the office. Daddy's big deal is happening tonight." A pause. "I know I promised Emily. Rain check for this weekend? We'll do the whole day, whatever you want." Another pause, longer this time. "I understand you're disappointed. Put your mother on." The man's voice hardened again as he spoke to his wife, making excuses that even Amir could tell were rehearsed. When he hung up, the silence in the cab felt heavier than before. At a particularly long red light, Amir watched the man close his eyes and pinch the bridge of his nose, a gesture so filled with exhaustion that for a moment, Amir saw himself reflected in this stranger, a man running so fast he couldn't remember what he was running toward. "Would you like me to change the route, sir?" Amir ventured. "There's construction on Broadway. We could take Church Street instead." The man looked up, seeming to notice Amir for the first time. "What?" "No, just get me there as quickly as possible." When they finally reached the destination, the passenger thrust a $50 bill through the partition. The fare was $38. "Keep it," he said, already reaching for the door handle. "Thank you, sir." "Your briefcase," Amir began, noticing the sleek leather portfolio on the seat. "Got it," the man replied, grabbing it and disappearing into the rain-slicked night without waiting for a receipt. Amir pulled away, searching for his next fare. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since the hurried falafel sandwich at noon. Perhaps he could afford a quick break now, grab something hot before continuing his night shift. He'd gone 3 blocks when he noticed the second briefcase, smaller than the first, tucked halfway under the passenger seat. He would have missed it entirely if a sudden stop hadn't caused it to slide forward against his own seat. Alhamdulillah, Amir sighed, slowing to pull over. Another trip back to the same building. More time wasted, but perhaps another tip if the man was relieved to have whatever was inside. At the next red light, Amir reached back and pulled the case onto the passenger seat beside him. It was unlocked, the latch having come undone during the drive. As he moved to secure it, the briefcase fell open. Bundles of cash, dozens of them, each wrapped in paper bands marked $10,000. Amir's hands began to tremble. His throat went dry. The light turned green, but he sat frozen as horns blared behind him. Mechanically, he pulled forward and turned into the first available parking spot, his mind racing faster than his thundering heart. $100,000, maybe more. It was more money than he would earn in 3 years of driving 18-hour days. $400 for rent, $2,000 for Layla's textbooks this semester, $700 for the medication his insurance wouldn't cover, the mounting debt from his wife's funeral that he'd been paying in small increments for years. And just like that, all of it could vanish. Every problem solved with this single briefcase that had been, what? Forgotten? Left deliberately? Was it even legal money? Amir closed the briefcase with trembling fingers and rested his forehead against the steering wheel. The interior of the cab felt suddenly airless, the patter of rain on the roof a deafening roar in his ears. His father's voice came to him then, clear across oceans and years. Your name means prince, my son. And a prince is measured not by what he takes, but by what he gives when no one is watching. Amir lifted his head, took a deep breath, and made the U-turn back toward 388 Greenwich. The security guard at the Harrington Group building initially refused to let Amir through, eyeing his worn jacket and cab driver ID with thinly veiled suspicion. Sir, I have Mr. Amir realized he didn't even know the passenger's name. I have an executive's briefcase. He left it in my taxi. It's important I return it personally. Name? The guard demanded. He was going to the 32nd floor, I believe. Amir tried. Tall man, gray suit. He arrived about 30 minutes ago. The guard's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he looked at Amir with slightly less hostility. Harrington's looking for a briefcase. That what you got? Amir nodded, relief washing through him. Wait here. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and the passenger emerged, now coatless, tie loosened, face flushed with what appeared to be equal parts relief and suspicion. You found it, he said, approaching Amir with cautious steps. Yes, sir. It was under the seat. Amir held out the briefcase. I didn't touch anything inside. The man took the briefcase and unlatched it slightly, just enough to confirm its contents. His shoulders sagged as tension visibly drained from his body. You looked inside, he said. It wasn't a question. It fell open when I picked it up, Amir admitted. I closed it immediately. The man studied Amir's face for a long moment. Do you have any idea what you're returning right now? Money, sir. A lot of it. $120,000, the man said quietly. Emergency liquidity for a deal closing tonight. Amir said nothing, suddenly conscious of the security guard watching them, of the cameras mounted in every corner of the lobby. Why did you bring it back? The question was simple, direct, almost confused. Amir met the man's gaze steadily. Because it wasn't mine. The passenger, Harrington, Amir now realized, let out a short, incredulous laugh. That's it? It wasn't mine. What else should there be, sir? Harrington seemed genuinely perplexed. Do you know how many people would have disappeared with this? Never to be seen again? Amir's back straightened slightly. I am not many people, sir. I am just me. For the first time, Harrington truly looked at the man standing before him, the frayed cuffs of his jacket, the circles of exhaustion beneath his eyes, the proud set of his shoulders despite it all. What's your name? Amir Najem. Where are you from, Mr. Najem? Damascus originally. Syria. Something shifted in Harrington's expression. Wait here, he said and walked back to the security desk. After a brief conversation with the guard, he returned and handed Amir a business card. Edward Harrington, CEO, Harrington Group. Amir read aloud. Come to this address tomorrow at 9 a.m. Harrington said, ask for me personally. Sir, I don't understand. A reward, Harrington interrupted. A substantial one. You've saved more than just money tonight. He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. And Mr. Najem, bring your resume. Before Amir could respond, Harrington had turned and walked back toward the elevators, the briefcase clutched tightly in his hand. The following morning found Amir standing in the marble-floored lobby of the Harrington Group headquarters, his best shirt ironed to crisp perfection beneath his only suit, the same one he'd worn to his wife's funeral and Layla's high school graduation. He'd spent the night alternating between hope and suspicion, wondering if this was some elaborate setup. Why would a CEO want his resume? Was this a test? A joke? The receptionist's voice cut through his thoughts. Mr. Harrington will see you now, Mr. Najem. Harrington's office occupied the corner of the 32nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. The man himself stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light, phone pressed to his ear. He's here, Harrington said to whoever was on the line. I'll call you back. He turned, gesturing to a chair across from his massive desk. Please sit. Amir lowered himself into the leather chair, acutely aware of how out of place he felt. On the desk, he noticed a framed photograph of a young girl, perhaps 10 or 11, with Harrington's eyes and a wide, unguarded smile. My daughter, Emily, Harrington said, following Amir's gaze. She's the reason I was in such a rush last night. Mr. Piano Recital. Again. The last word carried a weight of regret that surprised Amir. I understand, Amir said quietly. We do what we must for our children. Do we? Harrington's question seemed directed more at himself than at Amir. He shook his head slightly and held out his hand. Your resume? Amir reached into his worn leather portfolio, a gift from his university colleague's lifetime ago, and extracted the single-page document he'd stayed up until 3 a.m. perfecting. Harrington took it, his eyebrows rising slightly as he read. PhD, in economics from Damascus University. Published author, former department chair. He looked up. And you're driving a cab. In America, my credentials mean little, Amir said simply. And when you arrive as a refugee with a child to feed, he spread his hands in a gesture that contained years of quiet dignity in the face of diminishment. Harrington set down the resume. Mr. Najem, do you know what was really in that briefcase last night, besides the money? Amir shook his head. My career, my reputation. Harrington leaned forward. That cash was for a non-traditional liquidity event in a deal I've spent 3 years putting together. If it had disappeared, he let the implication hang in the air. I'm glad I could return it then. You saved me, Harrington said bluntly. And in my experience, when someone saves you, you pay attention. He tapped the resume. We have a research division focused on emerging markets, including the Middle East. We need people who understand the region beyond what they read in briefing papers. Amir felt his heart begin to race. Sir, are you offering a position, starting as a senior analyst? The salary is $110,000 annually, plus benefits. Harrington's expression remained impassive, as if he hadn't just tossed a life raft to a drowning man. Contingent on a background check, of course, but I suspect a man who returns a briefcase full of cash will pass without issue. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Amir gripped the arms of his chair, afraid he might actually fall. Mr. Harrington, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Harrington replied. I need someone with integrity on my team, Mr. Najem. That's rarer than expertise. Yes, Amir whispered, then cleared his throat. Yes, I accept. Good. Harrington pushed a folder across the desk. HR paperwork. There's also a signing bonus. Consider it your reward for last night. Amir opened the folder. The check inside made his vision blur. $50,000, Harrington said. After taxes. I thought about just giving you the cash from last night, but my CFO would have had a stroke. A strangled sound that was half laugh, half sob escaped Amir's throat. In an instant, the weight of 5 years, the constant fear, the grinding poverty, the humiliation of starting over from nothing, lifted from his shoulders. I can't possibly. You can and you will. Harrington cut him off. Think of it as enlightened self-interest on my part. I want you focused on your work here, not worrying about bills. Amir's hand shook as he carefully returned the check to the folder. Thank you seems insufficient. Then prove I made the right decision. Harrington stood, extending his hand. Welcome to Harrington Group, Mr. Najem. You start Monday. As they shook hands, Amir caught a glimpse of the two of them reflected in the window glass. The powerful CEO and the cab driver, connected by a moment of honesty in a city known for anything but. In the weeks that followed, Amir's life transformed with dizzying speed. He moved Layla from her cramped dorm to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, near both their workplaces. He paid off his debts. He bought new clothes appropriate for his position. He even sent money back to his brother's family, still struggling in a refugee camp in Jordan. But the most profound change wasn't in his circumstances, it was in himself. With each day that passed, pieces of the man he had once been, the respected professor, the confident intellectual, the person who looked forward rather than over his shoulder, returned to him. His shoulders straightened. His voice grew stronger. The constant knot of anxiety in his stomach began to unwind. At Harrington Group, his insights on Middle Eastern economies quickly proved valuable. Within a month, he was invited to contribute to major strategic initiatives. By the third month, Edward Harrington himself was stopping by Amir's office regularly to discuss potential opportunities in regions other analysts dismissed as too volatile. They're looking at risk without understanding resilience. Amir explained during one such conversation, these communities have survived generations of upheaval. They know how to adapt in ways our models can't quantify. Harrington nodded thoughtfully. You know what most of my Harvard MBAs are missing, Najim? They've never had to rebuild from nothing. You have. That's an education they can't buy. On a crisp December evening, 6 months after that fateful rainy night, Amir found himself invited to the Harrington family home for dinner, an honor rarely extended to employees. The Upper East Side townhouse was everything Amir had expected. Tastefully opulent, filled with art that whispered of old money and older connections. What he hadn't expected was the warmth. Emily Harrington, now 11, greeted him with enthusiastic questions about Syria, having prepared by reading books about Damascus. Mrs. Harrington Catherine was a pediatric surgeon with quick intelligence and a disarming lack of pretension. And Edward himself, away from the office, revealed a dry wit and genuine curiosity that his corporate persona rarely displayed. As they lingered over dessert, Emily excused herself to practice piano, and the conversation turned more serious. I never told you why I was carrying so much cash that night, Edward said, swirling brandy in a crystal glass. I assumed it was confidential, Amir replied. Catherine exchanged a look with her husband. It wasn't exactly standard procedure. The deal we were closing involved parties who preferred to operate outside traditional banking channels, Edward explained carefully. Nothing illegal, but not something our compliance department would have approved without weeks of review. I needed to move quickly. You took a risk, Amir observed. I've built my career on calculated risks. Edward set down his glass. But what I've realized, partly thanks to you, is that I've been calculating all wrong. What do you mean? The night you returned that money, I was ready to sacrifice my daughter's recital for a deal. The week before, I missed Catherine's birthday dinner for a conference call. His voice roughened. I've been chasing more zeros in my net worth while bankrupting what actually matters. Catherine reached across the table to squeeze her husband's hand. We've been talking about changes, priorities. Which brings me to why I invited you tonight. Edward continued. I'm restructuring our international division, creating a new position, Executive Director of Emerging Markets. Direct report to me, significant budget authority and equity partnership track. Amir's breath caught. That's a considerable advancement. It's yours if you want it, Edward said simply. You've proven yourself 10 times over these past months. The board has already approved. I'm honored, Amir said, genuinely moved. But why now? Edward leaned back in his chair. Because I'm stepping back, reducing my own role to spend more time with my family. His small smile touched his lips. I haven't missed a piano recital in 3 months. And what a difference it's made. Catherine added, her eyes warm on her husband. Later, as Amir prepared to leave, Edward walked him to the door. In the hallway, he paused by a small table where a familiar briefcase sat. The very one Amir had returned that rainy night. I keep it there as a reminder, Edward said quietly. Of what? That my worst mistake nearly became my best fortune? He turned to face Amir fully. You didn't just return my money, Najim. You returned my perspective. The two men stood for a moment in silence, each reflecting on how a single choice, to return what wasn't his, to recognize value beyond credentials, had altered both their lives. I'll see you Monday then, Edward finally asked, extending his hand. Amir took it firmly. I'll be there. As Amir stepped out into the winter night, snowflakes drifting gently through the golden glow of streetlights, he thought about the strange symmetry of life. 5 years ago, he had arrived in this country with nothing but his daughter and the desperate hope for safety. Now he walked its streets not as a stranger, but as a man who had found his place again, not despite his past, but because of it. His phone buzzed with a text from Layla. How's dinner with the boss? Too stuffy? Need rescue? He smiled, typing back, actually wonderful. Big news to share. Coming home now. Home. Such a simple word for such a profound concept. As Amir raised his hand to hail a taxi, this time as a passenger rather than a driver, he felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The journey had been harder and longer than he could have ever imagined, but somehow, against all odds, he had arrived exactly where he needed to be. And it had all begun with a simple choice on a rainy night. A choice to return what wasn't his, never knowing that what he would receive in return was nothing less than his life itself, renewed and restored in ways he could never have foreseen. The immigrant cab driver had returned $100,000 left in his taxi and found himself stunned by how completely the passenger had given him a new life. Not just through opportunity or money, but through recognition of his true worth, his knowledge, his character. Through being seen, at last, not as what he had lost, but for all that he still carried within him. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Amir looked back at the Harrington home, warm light spilling from its windows into the snowy night. Then he turned his gaze forward, toward home, toward Layla, toward the future that awaited them both. A future built on that rarest and most precious of foundations. A second chance, honestly earned and gratefully received.